Well, thank you for joining me as we work through Hebrews 11 and look at some of the lives of the patriarchs and how they lived by faith. And this week we've reached Isaac. We thought yesterday about Isaac's troubles that he experienced from outside his family. Now, sadly, Isaac is best known for troubles within the family. That's where he gets his record for us. That trouble began essentially around their two sons, the twin sons, and it began even before they were born. Um, even when Rebecca was expecting them, they were jostling and fighting within the womb. And of course, when they were born, the younger one came out grasping the heel of the older. And so that's what they called him, Jacob, which means he grasps the heel, but figuratively it means he deceives. And that's of course what he became the deceiver. And they'd been warned about this. Whilst Rebecca was pregnant, she'd prayed and asked for God to tell her why there was this struggle. And she was told there's two nations wrestling for dominance, even inside your womb. And that's going to be the characteristic of their lives. But it'll work out that the older will serve the younger. That's how it's going to be. And that's how it happened. Jacob the deceiver craftily undermines his brother Esau on a couple of occasions. The first when he takes his birthright, which is the inheritance rights that Esau would have held as the older son, and the second time his blessing, stealing that from right under Isaac's nose, literally. And of course, then later on they become two nations, Israel and Edom, and the rivalry continues there. Now the question for us is, how did Isaac handle it? Uh, Speaking as a parent, when thinking about parenting, one never stands on a pedestal and says, we're perfect, we're not. But we have to say that Isaac's way of handling it was less than perfect. He created a rivalry within his marriage. It existed between the boys, but he created it between him and Rebecca by having Esau as his favorite and Rebecca taking Jacob as hers. And that rivalry reached its pitch when, towards the end of his life, Isaac determines to give his blessing to Esau. And so Rebecca conspires to steal it and get it for Jacob. Now we might think, hey, what's the big deal? It's a blessing. But it's not like a blessing you might give where you write a nice card to somebody and say, I hope all goes well. Here's my best wishes to you and all that stuff. This is the patriarchal blessing from Abraham. If you look in Genesis 27, where he gives the blessing from verse 27, you see that the wording of it isn't just a nice card. It's this is the Abrahamic blessing. The wording of it is like that those who bless you will be blessed. Those who curse you, they'll be cursed. And then he, of course, gives power to the person he's blessing over the other sons. So Isaac is basically wanting to pass on God's promise for the world, for its salvation, to the one that God has said would not actually be the one to pass it on, giving power also to the one who was supposed to be um, under the other one. So what happens, we know, is that Rebecca works with Jacob to get it from him, and there are long-term consequences, tragic consequences for the family. I have no idea how God would have got the blessing to Jacob if they hadn't taken that route. There are no what ifs, that we can't ask that sort of question. But we have to believe that if you look at the consequences of their actions, it would have been better for them to trust God. Nevertheless, we're thinking about Isaac. What's happening in his life? Is he losing faith? Has he lost faith in God? Well, no, I don't think so. The writer to the Hebrews says that it was by faith that he blessed the boys, and believing that his blessing would convey God's blessing on them, and that they needed God's blessing more than anything else. But we have to say there is an element of disobedience, I think, in his life. He knows what God had said. He knows that the older was going to serve the younger, and that therefore his blessing, the Abrahamic blessing, should be passed to the younger. But he goes ahead and does it nevertheless. Now, if we're honest, there's that same element in all of us. This is revealing, as I've said before in previous broadcasts, the Bible is extremely honest about the failings of even its best people. But if we're honest, we know we're not the best, and we're just like this. There's a willful element in all of us. We're willing to obey up to a point, but no further. No, there comes a line in which we say, well, actually, God, you don't have the right to ask me to do that, or this is something I don't wish to be part of. We quietly resolve, if we're British actually, if it comes up that we don't like it, we bridle, and we quietly resolve to say, well, no, I'm going to do it anyway. I know best. I'll do what I want. Anyway, what right has God to do this? It's odd, isn't it, to think that it's possible to have great faith in some areas of life, perhaps many, and yet in another area to be resisting God, to be holding him at arm's length and saying, well, no, actually, what you want here isn't the most important thing. It's what I want. You don't have the right to tell me here. It's odd, isn't it? It's also humbling to realize that this is what we are. We need salvation because this is what we are. It's also strangely comforting that God knows us and chooses to bless us and chooses to work through us and chooses to save us. So Isaac is an example of that, I think. A man with faith, and yet in this area, he holds out and goes against what God wants and what he knows God has said. But God blesses him nevertheless. Well, we rejoice in God's mercy and kindness to us, and we're going to think about a bit more about God's blessing upon Jacob and Esau tomorrow. See you then.